Good morning. It's time for my third video where I'm counting down my favourite music albums of all time. I'm going from 150 all the way down to number one. This third one is going to cover 130 to 121. So let's get into it. Now, of course, this video will also be on Rumble, and every time I do a description on Rumble, we will add in a couple of songs. YouTube, of course, copyright restriction. There will be only a link in the description. So I want to get started then at number 30. And number 30 is the album Let's Dance by David Bowie. It was released in 1983. And to be frank, it was the first Bowie album that I really fell in love with very early on. It was, of course, full of hits, and it saw Bowie being produced by Neil Rogers, who was also involved in playing guitar on the album. And it's got some absolutely fantastic tracks. Uh, and released in 1983, it was a birthday present for me, which, of course, also had a special sort of feel to it. And who can forget the uh, hit singles, Modern Life, Modern Love, sorry, China Girl, with one of the sexiest videos of all time. Then we got the title track, of course, Let's Dance. And I also like a track on side two, Cat People, which features Stevie Ray Vaughan on guitar. All in all, certainly a very pop album by Bowie's standards, but I love it, and it's my 130 on my countdown. Next up on my countdown at 129 is the 1981 album by Susie and the Banshees called Juju. Why this album? Well, I was in Nottingham at the time when this was released, and I was fortunate to see them live at a local venue called the Rock City, and they were really buzzing. Their gothic style of rock was really becoming extremely popular, and I just with a light show as well, and of course Susie dressed in black with that frizzed out hair and makeup. It was just terrific. The tracks that I really love on this album are mainly on side one. Spellbound, which I think opens the album, is tremendous. In fact, the first side sort of really is as good as it ever got for them. And probably my favorite track is Arabian Nights, which really does sort of post punkish its way through that gothic style. And the band are as tight as hell. Lovely album. And it's my 129 selection on my countdown. It's by Susie and the Banshees. It was released in 1981 and it's called Juju. Up to my 128 selection now, and the 1993 album by Sting, 10 Summoners Tales. I played this absolutely to death when I got it. It probably was Sting's first return to a pop album after the demise of the Police. He then started his solo career and started off really with a couple of very sort of jazzy rock style albums. But this really brought us back to all those glorious pop themes. If I ever lose my faith in you, absolutely tremendous. I also love 7 Days, and it was full of tracks. It's probably me. You go through the album, and it's full of pop songs and lots of humour on it as well. Of course, he was Gordon Sumner, and the title is a sort of paraphrase on his name, Summoner's Tales, and had a little bit of a sort of a medieval feel to it. Great stuff by Sting, and it's my 128 selection, 10 Summoners Tales from 1993. Steve Forbert, and it's his debut album, Alive on Arrival. Now, there's a little story to this. It was released in 1978, and at that particular time, not long after anyway, I was at a party, and I heard this album, and it really glued itself to my ears. And I went out and bought it, of course, and I became quite a Steve Forbert fan, getting his first 4 or 5 albums. At the time, he was being talked of as a new Dylan. I didn't really see it like that. He had a tremendous band, and my favourite track on this, I still remember vividly. It isn't going to be that way, which is a sort of lament, really, to a relationship that's sort of stumbling around. Um, he's got a classic voice, and I think he's from the southern part of the USA. And Going Down to Laurel is another great track. Um, and get to listen to it. It's one of those lost gems, I believe. It's Alive on Arrival by Steve Forbert from 1978, and it's got into my top 150 at 127. The 126 selection now, and I'm going into 1978, and there was an album that was released, a debut album by a band from New York City, called Television. The name of that album was Marquee Moon, and I think it won the Sounds magazine album of the year, and quite rightly. It was absolutely awesome. It was a sort of very post-punk style, and it featured 2 twin guitars, and I was really heavily into guitar music at the time. But it had an originality, and it was fronted by the and lead guitarist and writer of the material, one Tom Verlaine. Now, tragically, we recently lost Tom. Um, uh, I'm not quite sure how he died, but he was getting on a bit. And I actually saw Tom about a decade after this album was released, and he was then going solo and producing and recording some really great albums. But I don't think it ever surpassed this one, and that's why it's in my top 150. The track is a sort of 11-minute piece where the guitar originality shines through. And so it's my 126 selection, Marquee Moon by Television, and it was released in 1978. 125 now. In 1996, the artist formerly known as Prince actually returned to being Prince. He had a number of years where he was in dispute with his record company, Warner Brothers. They were paying him a pittance and making an absolute fortune out of it. And of course, he had become one of the most talented artists in the world. His albums basically were a mixture of genres, and his ability to play the instruments was almost as good as anyone we'd ever seen. And although he was tended to gravitate to R&B soul, he was a supreme guitar player. And uh, although there were lots of singles hits, um, he was nevertheless such an important artist. And as I say, in 1996, he released his first album where he basically rejected the slave tag and replaced it with I'm Free, and it was called Emancipation. Now, this is an album that I absolutely adore, but it really is a bit of a marathon because he decided to make it a triple album. But if you go through it in perhaps stages, do a couple of albums a day, 6 sides can be a little bit daunting, but it's full of tremendous, tremendous material. And a couple of tracks that do stand out for me are the song Betcha by Golly Wow, which was a cover version of a huge soul hit in the mid 60s. And then there's this 3 minute dabble into uh, jazz that I find extraordinary, and it's called Caught in Time. And for me, it cemented this artist as one of the greatest of all time. And this album I've slotted in at 125 on my countdown. And it's called Emancipation. It's also got quite a lot of religious connotations to the lyrical work. Imagination, anyway, by Prince, and it's absolutely first class. Having it at 124 on my countdown is a band that I came to very, very late, but I'm very glad I did. In the mid 60s, of course, in the UK, we were absolutely getting the ultimate pop band in the Beatles. But across the pond, so to speak, there was another band, an American band, that some described as the American Beatles. They were called the Byrds, B-I-Y, BYRDS. And of course, throughout the 60s, they had a huge number of hits, led by Roger McGuinn. In the early days, also had David Crosby in their ranks. Um, and I started to get into this band in the early 70s. And this is possibly my favorite Byrds album, although for many, it might be seen as a bit of a self-indulgent type of record because it covers quite a lot of genres, and it's not sort of trapped in one particular style. But I love it. It was released in 1971. It's called Maniacs, and it's full of tracks that I adore. Jamaica Say You Will, later done by no, sorry, done by the Byrds, but it was written by Jackson Browne, of course. Paths of Glory, Tunnel of Love. It's a really tremendous piece of work, and uh, it's my number 124 in my countdown. It's called Bird Maniacs. And thank you very much, Roger McGuinn, Clarence Wright, Skip Batten, and I think it was it Gene Clark? Not too sure who was drumming, but a terrific piece of work, nevertheless. So number 123, and in 1984, I had the good fortune to hear a new band, courtesy of a friend of mine who was really into music and always came up with some new inspirational material. And he sat me down one day in his flat and said, "Listen to this, John." And I was absolutely captivated by it. It was a sort of, should we say, indie rock? No, soft rock, maybe. Anyway, the album was titled Rattlesnakes. It was by a man called Lloyd Cole and his band, The Commotions, and it set him on a long, long road, which he's still recording to this day. Not with the Rattlesnakes, sorry, not with the Commotions. They passed by the wayside, a few years after this debut, which came out in 1984. Perfect Skin was a huge hit for them. Cole's got a very distinctive vocal sound, and he writes very dramatic lyrics. He's quite emotional, it has to be said. Good stories, and he had a great band. And alongside Perfect Skin, I also love, because of the guitar work on this, Forest Fire. Um, the title track is another one to catch your ear. So get to listen to this one. It's by Lloyd Cole and the Commotions, their debut album, released in 1984, and it was called Rattlesnakes. And it's at my 123 in my countdown. To 122, and I've selected a band from Britain, very much a Brit pop band at the time. We're talking about 1980, and the name of the band were XTC, and this album, one of their best, was called Black Sea. When XTC arrived on the scene, it was at the height of the punk era, and I really couldn't get my ear around this very distinctive sort of crunchy guitar rhythm sound. But as they developed from these early beginnings, they became a really catchy uh, pop band, and many of them describe them as being almost the Beatles of the 80s. I'm not sure about that, but they did have two gifted songwriters in Andy Partridge and Colin Moulding, and on this album there was some absolutely great tracks. Generals and Mangers, a Tower of London, which was a huge hit, and the song about no no air in our lungs or something like that. No breath in our lungs. Very catchy stuff. Great album. In fact, all their 80s albums are worth a listen. But this is the one I put at number 1 in their discography, and it's caught my top 150 of all time, and we're at number 122, Black Sea by XTC, and it was released in 1980. So we're up to 131. This is the last selection in this video, and this is back to 1967. I first heard this album when I was 15 years of age in 1969. And once again, it's another debut. I am really into debuts because I believe that this is when the band has the most ideas. And in 1967, a band from Leicester came onto the progressive underground rock scene, and they were such a talent. Their name was Family, and they released their debut album, Music in a Doll's House, and the front cover encapsulates a sort of variety of settings in a child's doll's house, which reflects the variety of music that was on this album. Yeah, sure, they were a progressive rock band, but they had little snippets of strings, horns, and keyboards, and of course the two main protagonists in this band were the guitarist Charlie Whitney, who was a very underrated guitar player, and of course their lead singer who had a real sort of gruff growl to his vocals. His name, of course, and the name has escaped me there, Roger Chapman. And I saw this band many times, and they weren't just a rock band; they were a progressive rock band, and they could dip into anything. And this album is unique in many ways because it's virtually all segued together from through the first side to the second side. So it's difficult to sort of say one track is better than the other because it becomes a sort of a book really, where you start off with the first track and take you through to the last track on side two. Um, a marvelous piece of work, and it's at 121 in my countdown, and it's by Family, and it's called Music in a Doll's House. Music in a Dog's House. Yeah, I'm surrounded by dogs here, but Music in a Doll's House, and it's my 121. That completes video number 3. I hope to get the 4th one out shortly. Enjoy. Description: we have links to these albums, but if you're on Rumble, you will have heard selections at the end of my blah blah blah.